So this room was added in 1908 as a science lecture room. It had 100 seats arranged in tiers up the wall of the room, and lots of windows for bright lighting, and a counter at the front of the room for demonstrating experiments. So the room has actually served different purposes over the years. Later on, it became less important to have 100 students in a single physics class. They went for smaller classes. And this room was converted into the home economics room. So it was equipped with stoves, washing machines, sinks, ovens, and was used to teach domestic science, they called it, or home economics, to the girls. I don't think any boys took home economics. And later on, home economics ceased to be so important, at least as a school subject, and it was converted to a computer room. And now it has reverted to being a science classroom again. But you can still see it has large windows around the room and a large open space. Lots of lighting, fluorescent lighting, but originally it had one of the big skylights going right up to the roof to provide natural daylight into this room. The art room was added in 1908, and it still serves its original purpose. It was designed with south-facing windows for good light, but in fact an additional large skylight was added in later years, which is over at the far end of the room. And of course there's lots of fluorescent light. In addition to that, this room had a bay window. It's currently blocked off at the end of the room because they're doing some renovation work. But basically, this was one of the nicest and best lit rooms in the school and was very appropriate for all kinds of artwork. So this room was originally set up as the first chemistry laboratory. And there's an old picture here which shows what it used to look like, with a big circular workbench with sinks for the students to do their chemistry experiments, seating in the middle, and then a demonstration bench at the front for the teacher. So it's hard to imagine that this room is the same as that room photographed in 1903. Except that you can tell by the windows, looking at the windows, that it has the Gothic pointed windows on this floor. But one of the things that happened when the school was remodeled in the 1970s was that most of the interior features were lost. The ceilings were dropped, new fluorescent lighting was put in, new floors, new partitions, and so really much of the feel of the classroom part of the old school was lost. But that was all necessary mainly because of concerns about fire safety. In fact, originally, it had been decided that the school should be torn down and a completely new school should be built on a new site. But there was a major campaign fought by people who either were alumni of Lisgar or who felt that the heritage importance of the school should be preserved. And eventually the school board made the decision to renovate rather than rebuild. But a lot of changes happened, and this room is really a good indication of the extent of those changes, because there's very little that remains from the original appearance of the school. Because it was a chemistry laboratory, there used to be a preparation room across the back and a door in the corner, so that all the chemicals and the equipment needed for experiments could be prepared outside the classroom ahead of time and brought in as they were needed. So this room was for many years one of the main English classrooms. This picture shows rather smartly dressed students, not all men, there were a number of women students in the picture as well, sitting at the old style desks with the cast iron frames and the wooden tip-up seats. These rooms still had that kind of seating when I started here in 1961, though our English teacher decided to modernize. He had lived through several eras of teaching. Walter Mann was one of the most famous English teachers at Lisgar. He taught Governor General Adrienne Clarkson when she came here as a student, and he taught from 1933 until 1968. So more than 30 years as a teacher at Lisgar. There were many teachers who put in decades of teaching time at Lisgar and were very closely identified with the school. And you can speak to alumni who will remember these teachers, even though they may have come from different periods at Lisgar. I was actually in Walter Mann's classroom the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and people say that you always remember where you were on that day. Well, this room is where I was. But by that time, it had been modernized, and instead of having rows of wooden tip-up seats, we all sat around in a big rectangle and facing each other, and the teacher being part of the group. The windows in this room have the triangular transoms at the top, which were typical of all the stages of design of this building. The rooms on the third floor above us were the ones that had the pointed Gothic windows. And this room, like the French classroom, which was above it, and like the art room on the top floor of this wing, had the bay windows facing the Rideau Canal. At the moment, the bay window is blocked off. It's at the end of the classroom, but it's been undergoing renovation, which is nearly complete. So this was one of the rooms that holds memories for many Lisgar students. So we're in the oldest part of the school, but the attic. So originally this space was open on the entire floor. It was called the Convocation Hall, and it was the main meeting hall. It was like an auditorium. They could fit 200 people in here. And in fact, this is where the Governor General, the Earl of Dufferin, came in 1874 for the opening ceremonies. They were held on this floor. When the new auditorium was built in 1908, they no longer needed this to be used as the Convocation Hall, so it was converted into the girls' gymnasium. And it was used over the years, actually first by the boys and then by the girls, for basketball courts. And the pillar that you see behind me was always considered to be an extra player on the Lisgar team, because the Lisgar basketball players knew exactly how to bounce the ball off the pillar and gain a competitive advantage that way. In the 1950s, a new gymnasium was built across the street, and at that time, all this space was converted into science labs. So from 1953 onwards, this has been science labs. They've been modernized several times. The original skylights that went up to the roof are still there, hidden in the ceiling, but are no longer necessary because of the fluorescent lighting. But the window looking out at the back is still positioned where one of the original gable windows was located back in 1874, when this part of the school was first built.